Welcome to another edition of the It's Cavalier podcast. As always, it's your boy Mac. Joining me today is my friend and co-host Corey Walsh of Fear the Sword. Corey, my brother, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, Mac. Coming off Super Bowl Sunday, a day for me, which was a casual viewing experience. But for someone like yourself, you can't really say the same. And for that, I apologize to you and all the Birds fans out there.
Oh man, you're that makes me feel a little better. That makes me feel a little better considering how the game ended yesterday. But much like I was telling you right before we went on, um, multiple things led to that loss. It wasn't just the call at the end, and I might be in the minority here, but I do think it was a fair call. Although I don't, it was definitely holding, but I don't think it should have been called to because it helped decide the game. But at the very least, Philadelphia had numerous chances to close that game out, and they did not. They let Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid work their magic, especially on those routes, on the touchdown drives towards the end of the game. I know this is a Cavaliers podcast, so I'm going to keep it to Cavaliers here, but I got to say, as a Philadelphia Eagles fan, I was highly disappointed on how that game ended. But with that said, back to the Cavs. Heading into this final game before the All-Star break, I believe, the Cavs are 37-22 and winners of 6 straight with victories over the Grizzlies, the Indiana Pacers, Wizards, Detroit Pistons, Pelicans, and most recently the Chicago Bulls in a very hard-fought slugfest. And I'm willing to bet that they make it 7 in a row against the lowly 14-43 Spurs team, who should certainly be overmatched. But I mean, you never want to truly count out your opponent, but this is definitely one that the Cavs have to take advantage of if they're trying to move up in the standings within the Eastern Conference with so much shifting. But with that said, Corey, is there anyone on this Spurs team that the Cavs need to game plan for? Because they have some decent enough role players and are led by Keldon Johnson.
Yeah, I was gonna say Keldon Johnson's obviously one of them. I mean, they just have an abundance of like pieces that if you acquired them as a bonus in a trade, you'd be like, oh, nice. We just acquired a depth piece, except for Keldon Johnson. Keldon Johnson was a training camp invite for the USA team, so he is far from being a throw-in type player. But Devin Vassell is also pretty solid, but he's been playing pretty well for the Spurs this year. I mean, Jakob Poeltl was obviously one of their better players, but he was just shipped out for some reason to Toronto, the sellers of the trade deadline, as we were hearing all throughout the weeks leading up to it, only for them to acquire a center that
They
I
doubled
didn't.
down. No.
They're like, you know what? I would love to get another 7-footer in here because this team has no size. Just kidding. That's all we have. And Fred VanVleet is still there. But yeah, no. I mean, the last thing you can be in the NBA is complacent. So I don't know if I'm necessarily thinking just because we're playing the Spurs and we're on a streak. Streaks end at some point. And I
Such
feel
a
like
pessimist.
no, I'm just saying, like, I don't want to underestimate a team, even though, like, we were on the opposite side of this at one point, not even, like, 2 years ago, where we were
Absolutely.
hoping we would scrap out wins. Like, these are professional players. I never want to, like, just think we're going to go into something and do well. I mean, I wouldn't, like, it's Greg Popovich, too. So Pop might be cashing checks right now, for all we know, and not really trying to coach the roster, but I think it should be in the Cavs' favor, but we played it. This is like our 6th game in like 10 days.
There has been a lot of basketball played by the Cleveland Cavaliers lately. Make no mistake on that, and they have done their part, man. They've really shown through, especially when the circumstances were not necessarily in their favor, especially in that game against Chicago. That was on full display. The second half of a back-to-back, those guys were understandably tired, looked exhausted out there, and man, they fought their asses off to bring home that victory. Although the bench was a major point of contention, rightfully so, because you just did not get a ton of production from this Cavaliers team, and they honestly could not help bolster the starters. We're talking here like we want to get the starting five some rest. as much as we can, especially with some of these guys coming back to full strength, like Ricky Rubio and Dean Wade. Yet, when they do see the court, especially in the game against Chicago, they're not adding anything. Karis LeVert, we'll talk about him here in a little bit. 0-4 from the field. Ricky Rubio 0-6. Still I feel like he's still trying to get into his rhythm, but that could be me. Jetty Osman also not very good from the field either. 1-4, and then the nail in the coffin in the bench, the ninth man, Dean Wade 0-5. Just you didn't get a lot of shooting from your bench, and that actually was a theme within the starting lineup for much of the night too, until things started to heat up a little bit in the second half. But you look at a game like that where the Cavs appear to be just too tired to pull it out, yet they gritted their way all the way to a victory, despite some of the shooting woes, by absolutely clamping down on the Bulls. And this is a fun little stat right here. Over the Cavs' last 6 games, they've held their opponents to an average of 98 points per game. And on the season in total, they've held their opponent under 100 points 20 total times out of 59 games. That's ridiculously stifling defense, in my opinion. Now, in regards to the Spurs actually score more points per game than the Cavs do. I don't know if that says a lot about the Spurs or if that says a lot about the Cavs, but they're coming in scoring 112.5 per game, which is only good for 23rd in the league. So I want y'all to let that sink in. If I'm saying that the San Antonio Spurs score more points than the Cavs and they're ranked 23rd in that department, that says a lot. That says a lot about the production offensively that the Cavs are putting out on the court. And it says even more about the defense, because we're not necessarily winning these games because we can chuck up a whole bunch of shots and make a whole bunch. Although we have guys that can do that individually, we're mostly winning off the terrific efforts on the defensive side of the ball. But I say all that to say, do you think the Cavs will be able to continue their trend of stifling defense tonight against the Spurs?
Yeah, another key point to what you said about the Cavs offense not ranking highly is that they play the slowest pace of play in the league. Slower pace of play equals less shots. They like to just do half court. They're not necessarily a transition team.
It's playoff basketball. It's going to fit in perfectly in playoff basketball.
And I would say the reason the Spurs statistically look better offensively from a points per game standpoint is because their defense is atrocious.
Matador.
And so they're kind of their possessions would definitely outweigh that of a Cavs possession per game basis. But tonight, yeah, I think the Cavs should have an easier time unless like Doug McDermott goes like nuclear from 3, which always seems to happen with this Cavs team, that they just go up in the gauntlet and face one random player that just gets smoldering hot from 3, a la Jalen Smith last year is a major point that sticks out to me in my head. But yeah, I think the Cavs overall, they have obviously the personnel they should handle this game well, but we've seen times this year where the Cavs lose to a team that many think is beneath them, that they shouldn't lose to. And that's just a case of undervaluing your opponent, which is, it's natural when you're a team that's like playing as well the Cavs are, to then match up against someone like San Antonio, who's in the Wembanyama sweepstakes more than they're in anything else. Like the Spurs are actively trying to lose. I mean, you trade away Jakob Poeltl, you trade away Josh Richardson. You probably would have traded away Doug McDermott if someone wanted to eat that contract. No one was really biting on it. I mean, they traded DeJounte Murray in the offseason. Josh Primo got released. They're having a rough year overall. I would really hope that if they don't win, though, I can automatically see Cavs Twitter just going back to the Fire JB mantra that they were shouting from the rooftops in the middle of the year. But notice how those tweets have faded away again.
Winning tends to cure all in that regard. And when the losses do start to happen consecutively, that's essentially the first thing that gets done out there. Fire everybody, get somebody else to replace JB, which is just ridiculous in my opinion because he's not to me not judged on what he does in the regular season. Obviously, he has to make the playoffs. That's a no brainer. But he's not going to be fired because he loses a game in the regular season. It's going to come down to the postseason for JB, at least in my estimation, and for this season. Is this like I think we talked about this a lot on whether or not it was a make or break season for him. I think absolutely it is, but it's not going to come down to the regular season. It's a postseason or bust for him, and I would not hesitate to say probably playoff, maybe even a playoff series victory before we start talking about the hot seat getting even hotter for JB. But to that, I'm going on a rant here, but we're just not at that point.
I don't think JB is on the hot seat whatsoever. I think
Yeah,
even if they lost pretty handily in the first round, I think that they would still just making the playoffs alone, I think is the benchmark. Not being a play-in team, I think is a benchmark. I mean, Kobe Altman, unless he decided to like completely 180 on his like expectations for the year, then he said it was pretty much to just like make the playoffs, be
yeah.
competitive. It isn't a championship or bust year. Also, you can kind of tell that Kobe doesn't think it's an all or nothing year because if he thought so, he would have been more eager to pull the trigger during the deadline. And obviously, he was content with the way things were and wanted room for growth. He really emphasized that in his interviews after the draft or after the deadline. So I think JB is pretty safe regardless. I know Cavs fans probably wish he wasn't, but you know, I'm all set.
I mean, I think that's fair. I think that's a fair estimation because based off the wording from just about everybody in the organization at Cavs Media Day and at the Donovan Mitchell introduction, it's that this is going to be something with not. It's not going to happen overnight. There is a timeline here in place. Although the Mitchell trade did expedite expectations, things of that nature, it's not championship or bust just yet. So I think your statement is very credible, very fair in that regard. Um, got a lot of season left. The postseason is still a ways out, and we don't know what seeding is going to ultimately look like. But we're so far from that it's not funny. So I really hope that Cavs Twitter, Cavs social media, whatever, what have you, Cavs stop with that particular aspect of critiques in regards to the coach. Um, but speaking back to the Cavs defense, what in particular, or what do you think makes this Cavs defense go? And you know, who or what are the primary reasons?
I mean, obviously, the Mobley Allen combination allows for a lot of freedom defensively. We always say how Mobley is so versatile and his ability to move around, but Jared Allen's pretty underrated in that sense too. Like they both act as if free safeties just moving around, being able to cut lanes with their length and make people want to not really attack the basket whatsoever. Having those two alone can make it so players like Darius Garland don't seem like a liability defensively. Not that Darius Garland's like the worst defensive point guard in the league
He's
by
gotten
any
better.
stretch, but we if he was on like a team with a more normal 4-5 where they didn't have such defensive stalwarts, I would think he would be exposed much more often than he is. Donovan Mitchell is also playing at a defensive level we saw a few years back in Utah, where he's bought in, unlike last year, where it seemed like he was all offense, kind of haphazardly going through it. Okoro obviously really contributes to the defense because that is his bread and butter. And I think Karis LeVert also adds to the defensive, and I think that's one of his strongest points this year, along with his ability to find others. I would say his facilitation and defense have been his strongest points to me this year. Like you can tell JB has this team bought in defensively. They know that that's how they're going to win games. That's how they're going to beat opponents that have more offensive firepower than them. It's not because they're going to compete in shootouts night to night. It's because they'll always be trying 100% on every possession. If you beat this Cavs defense, it's more likely than not either your players got hot or the Cavs had a miscommunication, which happens just naturally. It's human nature. But overall, I think the Cavs defense is by far still their identity. And even with Donovan Mitchell being like a 25 plus points per game scorer, it doesn't change the DNA of this team.
I completely agree. I mean, you just look at the individual defensive ratings for many of these Cavs. It's crazy. And I don't know, people get their stats from anywhere, but I'm just going to go with Stat Muse here. Jared Allen is listed at 107. Evan Mobley is listed at 107.1. And Donovan Mitchell, to my surprise, 109.8. You actually have a slew of Cavaliers who are not too shabby on the defensive end, and that does include Isaac Okoro, Karis LeVert, and a few others. And Darius Garland wasn't nearly as high in the defensive rating category as I thought he would be. He's actually improved, in my opinion. And like at his size and I'm not going to call it lack of athleticism, because his athleticism just shows up in different areas, different ways, similar to like a Kyrie Irving is. He's not an explosive athlete, but he's finesse, and that is athleticism within itself. But he is never going to be like a Patrick Beverly type in regards to defense.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, he's just not going to be, and that's perfectly fine because he just does so many other things so well. And as long as he's giving you such big contributions on the offensive side, you can live with that. Same thing with Donovan. Although you want these guys to compete on the defensive end, and they are. They've taken that challenge. That said, now that the dust has settled on the NBA trade deadline, give me your honest opinion. And that's what I want. I want your honest takeaway from this. Did the Cavs get it right, or did they let an opportunity pass at the deadline?
I think the Cavs weren't in really any position to make a power move unless you really wanted to shake up you wanted to get rid of Karis, which really wasn't going to move the needle for many teams. I feel like his stock wasn't super high at the time. Isaac Okoro's stock was probably the highest it's been in like 2 years, I would say, based on his recent streak of play. But I didn't feel like getting rid of him now was the best chance for us to be successful. Kevin Love's contract, while it's expiring and some teams really want it, I didn't think the market was no one was really clamoring for Kevin Love to come in and try to shore up some gaps for them, especially after his recent stretch of play. So I didn't really want the Cavs to make a move. I felt like that was going to be more just succumbing to pressure than kind of just viewing it from like the 10,000 foot view. I really was on. I know a lot of people wanted Karis LeVert off the team. It felt like, and they still do, and are baffled that Karis LeVert is still on the team. But I think Karis LeVert, when push comes to shove, is a very valuable player in the sense, like, if you look at his stats, you can just be a box score guy, just be like determined. I feel like half the people who complain about Karis LeVert look at the box score when they didn't watch the game the night before, and they're like, "Oh my God, he shot 4 for 13. That's ridiculous," and then forget to omit that he like was kind of flirting with like triple doubles, with having 5+ rebounds and 5+ assists. It feels like more nights than not. And I think he provides, like, he is like, I know our bench has been atrocious all year, but he has definitely been our most reliable outside of Cedi Osman offensively. He's our most complete bench player right now. He is going to come in and at least make an impact. He is a net positive in most lineups that he's included in. And I think that gets understated a ton when you bring up Karis LeVert. But long story short, yes, I'm happy that the Cavs kind of stood pat. I would have been upset if they just made a move that kind of reached a desperation. Like, if you wanted the Cavs to look like the Lakers and give up a bunch of players for something that really didn't move the needle that much for you, just to be like, oh, look, we did a trade. Cool. Like, it's not 2K, guys. Like, we don't need to make a trade every chance we get.
See, that's exactly where I'm at. And I did not for the life of me understand like the absolute necessary need for the Cavs to make a deal. It just kind of seemed like it would be fan service for them to do it. And they just didn't necessarily need to do that. And Kobe Altman has admitted as much. And frankly, when you're looking at this, I mean, let's just break it down here. So you're looking at the trade assets available to the Cavs. Now, whether or not Cavs fans thought that they could move off of Kevin Love's damn near $30 million expiring deal is neither here nor there. Because as you put, it just was not an attractive asset, especially with his recent play. And that's a lot of money. That is a lot of money, expiring or not, to have on your roster, or at least your salary cap for the rest of the season, for a guy who's probably going to sit for the presumably the rest of the season. And likely it would have to have been a contender. At least that's my assumption. Somebody who's looking to shed some salary, somebody who may be looking to add a shooting option, though Kevin Love can still get it done when he's healthy. I
And
won't
what
take that away.
contender A has the cap space to take on Kevin Love, and B, why would the Cavs want to take on more salary for more years when they have players that are going to need to get paid in the future? That was another thing for me. It's like, I don't know if Cavs fans were expecting him to be like, oh, let's swap a $30 million expiring with another $30 million expiring and hope for the best. Like, no contender is going to want to do that. And no, why would a team like Detroit just taking Kevin Love and then just be like, oh, by the way, you can have like 2 Torian Prince style contracts? Like, I never understood it. And I kind of wanted Royce O'Neal. I felt like that was the
I did
one
too.
player I was like thinking about, that it was semi-realistic if we wanted to, cut bait with our sweet Lord and Savior Dylan Windler and just throw in like a second round pick, because the Cavs have an abundance of them. But yeah, overall, I just didn't see anything out there that was feasible or that I would have wanted out of pure desperation.
I think that's literally the sane way to view it, like most people. But when you're just looking at the Kevin Love contract in particular, GMs weren't biting on that shit. They were not, frankly, they were not going to bite on that. And then you look at the multiple second rounders available to use, but opted against it, presumably after shipping out so much draft capital in the Mitchell deal. But I will say this in regards to that point. There were numerous productive role players who went for second rounders in filler. Jay Crowder went for 5 seconds, which is unbelievable, in my opinion, just too much for a guy who hasn't played this season yet and has been, I don't want to say consistently hurt, but he's not the picture, the role model in regards to health. The Pelicans got Josh Richardson, a player many Cavalier fans wanted to be in wine and gold for Devontae Graham, I believe, in 4 second rounders. The Celtics got sharpshooter Mike Muscala, who kind of lit the Cavs up a few nights back for Justin Jackson, and 2 second rounders. And as you already mentioned this guy earlier, the Raptors got Jakob Pertl for Kim Birch in multiple seconds, and on and on. Like, many guys.
It was the second round trade deadline. If you were looking for first rounders, it was the day before with Russ trade, and that was it.
It was literally open season on those second rounders. And honestly, it was nice to see. Like, this might have been like the craziest trade deadline I've seen in some time, if ever.
It was a lot of role player moves. There was like, outside of the Russ trade, which I guess, outside of the KD trade, obviously, and the Kyrie trade, it just felt like it was a bunch of quality players getting thrown back and forth, being like, I don't want these role players. I'll take them for your role players. And here's a second round pick.
That's basically, and that was happening before deadline day. Like Rui going to LA, I believe, for some second rounder, and was it Kendrick Nunn to Washington. Small little moves like that have the potential to pay off in the long run. And that was, if I have to say anything about the deadline for the Cavs, I will say this. I understand that point. Like, not moving one of the second rounders for one of these role players, I get it. But when you really look at the players who moved, are any of those guys, can they lay true claim to being one of the better options that the Cavs could have in an 8 to 9 man rotation? Would they be able to supplant anybody who's already playing? And we'll talk about the Cavs' recent addition here in a minute that kind of relates to this, but I'm just not positive on whether or not there was really anybody out there that the Cavs could have reasonably acquired with the trade chips. And then, we talked about Love, we talked about the second rounders, and we already talked about this guy a little bit, but the real trade chip that the Cavs had to float out there was LeVert, who's making about I want to say 17.5 million this season, and is also on an expiring just like Love. But for all his warts, LeVert is still a pretty damn good option to have off your bench, especially come postseason time when it's more so half court basketball in play. And so, speaking of LeVert once more, do you actually see him as a long-term piece for the Cavs moving forward? Because again, he's making 17.5 mil this year, and I'm not sure if he'll eclipse that number on his next deal.
Yeah, no, I think Karis LeVert's gonna probably be in the 12 million a year, 10 to 12. I'm no spot rack. I don't have the exact calculations in my head, but I think Karis LeVert is a very serviceable player, a player that many teams would want on their roster. He's versatile. I think he kind of gets a rap now as the tunnel vision scorer type. I think the Cavs are trying to break that mold, and I feel like I do see it with his play now. I think he's rounding out to being a very serviceable player, and frankly, I think the Cavs fans are underrating how valuable he can be game to game. I would want Karis LeVert back, which I was saying to Mac before this podcast that this is absolutely wild that me and him I feel like are on the soapbox of the keep Karis LeVert train, because for those longtime listeners, they remember fondly and well that when we acquired Karis LeVert, me and Mac were wondering why we went for the less efficient Colin Sexton option at the time. And here we are.
Verbatim. That's exactly what we said, verbatim, for all you guys who may have come on to listen after that episode aired. That was literally exactly the words out of our mouths. Right? Why are we getting a less efficient, injury-prone version of Colin Sexton?
And now, ironically, Karis LeVert is like having his most durable season of his career when you look at the games played. And he's about to play the most minutes. He's on pace to break his most minutes played in a season since I think his sophomore year was the second most minutes he ever played. So it's pretty crazy to think how far Mac and I have come. Look at the growth we have as human beings, that we're here defending Karis LeVert to the death against the Cav Twitter. Karis is the new Kevin for me, because I can't have my sweet prince Kevin Love to cheer on as he is rehabbing a injured thumb. At least that's what I'm hoping, and that maybe I'll see Kevin Love again someday.
Oh man, we've come for full circle here, as they say, in regards to the bird. And who knows what the future holds for this guy, but he is a player that I'm very happy is still on this roster, considering some of the other options that we have. Like, and for all the shit that people give Karis LeVert when he has an off shooting night, where are you at, people? Where are you at when Jetty Osman is having these same terrible shooting nights from the field? Because I just don't see the complaints from about Jetty Osman when he goes 4 of 14, things of that nature. It's just not happening. So be equal.
I know the worst thing about Karis LeVert too is like people forget. I think they think when they think about Karis LeVert, it's like, well, we traded him for Ricky and protected first. Yeah, that first is going to convert to a second, and we got Ricky Rubio back. So we basically there shouldn't be expectation that Karis LeVert needs to be the same player that we traded for at the deadline. We don't need him to be that player. Like, Karis LeVert is very complete in the sense that he is a good tertiary ball handler. He has good vision. We see it night to night. He's bought in defensively, and he's a taller guard that can get rebounds. It just doesn't make sense to have
Mike knows. Mike knows.
Mike always knows. All right.
For the audio, people streaming this via audio, Karis via Mike Wysong. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Karis is probably the better rebounder than what we could have got. I like it.
I love it. That's all I need. Some Karis LeVert stands in the chat. That's what I want, baby. Let's get it.
Oh man, yeah. Who knows what the future holds in regards to this guy? But for me, like, my belief. Everybody who's listened to me on Twitter or on this podcast knows exactly how I feel about Karis. So I'm not going to go extremely deep into it, but I feel like now that the trade deadline is gone and over, he doesn't have to worry about being moved. He doesn't have to have that hanging over his head. And now that Ricky Rubio is healthy, that kind of solidifies his role even more. So as long as you feature him out there with the likes, yeah, I see that down there. As long as you feature him with the likes of Darius Garland, one of or two of Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, or Ricky Rubio, and he's operating as the secondary ball handler, I feel like he can be a really productive player. And I think you're going to start to see more mistake-free basketball from him. And let's be honest here, he's probably not going to necessarily completely change who he is. He is prone to boneheaded mistakes sometimes, but I feel like he makes more good plays than he screws up, if that
I
makes
think
any
people
sense.
just like if he makes a mistake, it's something that like I feel like is a unifier for Cavs fans. They're like, "Oh my god, look at
We
Karras! He
should have
made a
traded him.
They're like, look at him, he dribbled it off his kneecap. What an idiot!" Or he forced
that
that pass.
that's
And then
exactly that encapsulates perfectly how like the trends are in regards to him. Like he makes 5 good plays and then he makes one bad one and then he should be gone from the team basically.
I think it's very telling also that if the Cavs didn't want, if they felt like they weren't going to be able to retain Karis LeVert after this year, they probably would have looked to move him still. But obviously, we know there's talks ongoing and there's interest on both sides for him to return. So I think the deadline in a weird way was also telling of Karas's future past this year with the Cavs. I would kind of be surprised unless a team that we're not expecting is looking to burn some cap space and are willing to overpay for Karis LeVert, which in that case is understandable. But I think if things play out pretty normally, which in the NBA is not an easy thing to forecast, I would expect Karis to be back in Cleveland next year.
Yeah, certainly possible. I'm not honestly, I'm not going to bank on it, but I would like to see it. I think the Cavs can go over the cap to sign him. Don't quote me on that. I'm not a cap guy, but I think it's possible.
It's
Um,
Capalier.
the name of the show, man. That's the new name of the show. To close things out here today, obviously, we cannot let this episode pass without talking about the recent addition to the Cavs. Although the Cavs remained stagnant at the deadline, they did end up hopping into the buyout market and scooped up Danny Green, who many of you may remember was originally a Cleveland Cavalier to begin his career. He was selected 46th overall back during the 2009 NBA draft. Holy shit, that's a long time ago. Green actually spent the first 20 games of his career in wine and gold and would wind up ultimately being waived by the Cavs and eventually found his way to the San Antonio Spurs, who we are playing tonight, where he truly burst onto the scene as one of the league's premier 3-and-D wings. I think
Against LeBron James.
Yes, on the biggest stage in basketball. He would wind up winning 3 total titles, 2 with the Spurs and another alongside Kawhi Leonard with the Toronto Raptors. Corey, first off, how do you feel about this signing? And secondly, does Green actually project to see any time in the rotation, or is this just added depth?
I am ecstatic about Danny Green being on the Cavs. It hasn't, you kind of thought when LeBron left, the ability for the Cavs to attract buyout market level talent was pretty much out the window. But obviously, veterans around the league value what the Cavs are building. And I think the main factor for Danny Green coming here is more that I think when they laid it out to him, they kind of expected him to get minutes on a night-to-night basis. I don't necessarily think he's just going to be a situational player. I think this is going to kind of shake up some of the minutes. I think JB is no stranger to situational minutes. I mean, the times that you see Jetty versus he vanishes, the same with Lamar Stevens, Dean Wade, now Kevin Love. Like, it's going to come and go. The Cavs do need 3-point shot attempts, and Jetty definitely allows for that. But I think Danny Green is also going to be very valuable. And Danny Green, we can't really say what we know of him physically right now because he just came back off of his surgery for his, I believe, torn ACL with Memphis. Just came back, and then just like that, he is no longer on the Grizz. So All worth it in the end, but
Life comes at you fast in the NBA. Okay.
but he goes from one contender to another, so it all just settles. I'm pumped to have that type of veteran presence as well. I think it never hurts, especially more on-court veteran presence. I mean, yes, it's nice to have Robin Lopez and Howell Neto, but they get to see the court when things are either dire in terms of injury, or it's when they're just trying to give the big players some rest.
A blowout. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's very nice that we got Danny Green. I think he's going to add a lot of off-court value and hopefully a lot of on-court value as well. But I think it's going to take a game or two when he officially steps on the court to see kind of where he's at. And depending on how good he looks, I think it's going to greatly determine the minutes, because it was a low risk move. So it's not like they feel like they have to prove his worth to be on the floor. They just threw money at him and said, please come.
You summed it up totally. It's a low risk move. There's absolutely no downside to this. Like, he's not going to mess with chemistry. We know how he, the veteran leadership that he can bring to the table. He has championship experience. And above all else, the man is a 39.9% shooter from 3-point range. When he's on, when he's healthy, when he gets the opportunities, especially via the catch and shoot variety, the man can knock down the 3 ball. And for the people out there who are clamoring for a trade, that's what the biggest area outside of maybe getting some depth at the 5. That's the biggest area where people were complaining. Like, you got to get these motherfuckers some spacing. You got to get them some added spacing. And you know what? What better way to do that than to go on the buyout market and bring home a guy who has that experience and can knock down that 3 ball. He's not, like I said, he's not going to throw anything off. Time will tell if he's actually a rotation guy here in Cleveland, or if he is just a situational basketball, addition. But you can do much worse than adding him. I mean, it's kind of the equivalent at this point is like getting, and people are probably going to disagree with me for saying this, but we clearly needed it last season because we were trying to make up for the departures due to injury of Ricky Rubio and Con Sexton. It's kind of like adding Rajon Rondo. You're just throwing a dart. You're hoping that it sticks. And we know didn't necessarily play out that well with Rondo, but he was in the rotation at certain moments, and he did have a few games where he contributed.
God, I loved Rajon Rondo. I totally forgot about Rajon.
I mean, I know, like I was hesitating there to say that, but I think it's pretty similar. Like, it's just a thrown dart. It's not necessarily something you're expecting to completely like take the Cavs over the hill to compete, but it is a move nonetheless that has potential to pay off. And this is a much different situation than it was last year with adding like BG, Brandon Goodwin, or Rondo. This is a pretty set Cavaliers team in terms of depth at the moment, without having to sacrifice anything big time to acquire a true upgrade. So I love the addition. At the end of the day, but I'm just not sure if we'll actually crack the rotation.
I have a feeling I don't know why. I know when you look at the minutes, like there's no really any wiggle room, but I feel like JB is going to find some way to kind of kick the tires and see how he looks. I like I said, I think his first few games are going to kind of determine like how it's going to play out, and maybe in practice too, because he is just getting back to game shape in a way. So as long as he, like at the minimum, if he can just provide perimeter defense and space the floor, that's all you really want from Danny Green. And that's what this Cavs team needs. Like on a night where Isaac Okoro is just not hitting, throw in Danny Green, get like 75% of the defensive value with 120% more of the offensive value of Karras or if Isaac's not hitting, and you got yourself a good plug-in.
Way to undersell Isaac's defense. Danny Green's coming to the door already providing 75% of what Isaac gives on D.
Danny Green used to be a very good perimeter player. All right.
He did. I said he was a premier 3-and-D wing. Don't quote me on this, but I believe he has an all defensive selection in the mid 2010s. I think it was like 2016, 2017, one of those years. He was selected to an all defensive team because he's been that good. Obviously injuries have kind of sapped him of that.
Yeah. Yeah. But hey, The biggest headline of that acquisition is now we have a competing Cavalier podcast again. Because now the Danny Green pod is going to just take all of our listeners. So that was a good run we had.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all downhill.
For our 50 listeners, it was nice knowing you.
It's all downhill from here. Hey, maybe we can get Danny on. We'll see.
Yeah, just a little collab.
Hey, we didn't have no luck with Dean Wade. Maybe we'll have some luck with Danny.
Yeah, then we'll tell Danny to tell Dean you missed your chance.
Oh, man. Yet again, the Cavaliers have an opportunity to get better. Hopefully, we'll see if they do that with Danny Green. If not, they're rolling right now. Like we said at the beginning of the episode, 6 straight wins, hoping to make that 7 tonight against the San Antonio Spurs in a game that comes on in about an hour or so. So with that being the case, like we always tell you guys, if you want to reach out to us, you can at itscavalier_pod on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and more. Jeez, how do I always fuck this up?
It's a lot to say. I'm just glad my job is to sit back and just go like, yeah.
You get the point. If you want to be added to the exclusive It's Cavalier Discord chat, you know what to do. Leave a rating, leave a review, leave a screenshot of said review, and send it to itscavalier53@gmail.com, and we'll send you an invite. That said, go Cavs. Have a good night.
Go Cavs.